Last month, a product team generated 64 requirements in 30 minutes using a single grid, and they weren't shouting over each other on a video call or scribbling on a whiteboard that nobody could read. They used the Lotus Blossom technique, a structured brainstorm created by Japanese management consultant called Yasu Matsumara. If your remote workshops feel chaotic and your ideas keep slipping through the cracks, then this grid is the fix. I'll walk you through the exact setup with a project management example and the mistakes that I've seen teams make so that you don't waste your first session. Most of us have sat through a brainstorm that felt more like a free-for-all than a workshop. And on a remote call, it's even worse because you can't read the room. Someone's always talking over the mute button while a few people stay silent. And by the time you hang up, you've got a mishmash of half-captured ideas scribbled on a digital whiteboard or trapped in a chat transcript. The real problem hits the next morning. You're trying to write up the requirements and you realise half the features you discussed never ended up on the page. It's frustrating, waste your time, and you don't have that when you're juggling multiple projects. But there is something interesting about structured ideation. When teams are forced to fill in every box in a grid, they push past the obvious first answers. And in fact, the sixth, seventh, or eighth ideas tend to be the most creative because the easy ones are used up. A messy brainstorm rarely gets you that far because there's nothing forcing the group to keep going once the first few thoughts are out. If you're going to gather requirements for a new product launch, say, those missed ideas could turn into missed features, scope gaps, expensive late changes that land in your lap later. So this grid replaces your chaos with a clear canvas. Everyone contributes quietly. You lose nothing. So this technique, Lotus Blossom technique, created in the 1960s by a Japanese management consultant who wanted a way to combine free association with a systemic framework. And he produced a simple grid that's supposed to look like a lotus flower opening up. You can see whether it looks like a flower or not from this template, but at its heart, the technique is just a 3x3 grid. You write your central problem or theme in the middle box and then surround it with the 8 related ideas in the boxes around it. And we call those 8 outer box the petals. It is actually less complicated than it sounds. And once you see it in action, you'll wonder why you ever brainstormed any other way. So here's what it looks like with the central box filled in. So let's zoom in. You can see here our central box is comms strategy, and around the outside I've put some ideas of things that we need to consider when we're thinking about our project communication strategy. Each petal then becomes the centre of its own new 3x3 grid. You ask the team for another 8 ideas for every petal, and that second ring is where the real depth lives because you're breaking each sub-theme into tiny pieces. Once you've filled up that outer ring, you've generated up to 64 ideas that branch out from that original concept. That number matters because the quota that you're trying to reach forces you to push past the easy answers. If you stop at 3 or 4 ideas, you stay in the really obvious stuff and you never stretch into the unusual connections that solve the problems. So the Lotus Blossom grid makes you complete every box, and you can take it out further than that. If you've got more ideas, take another idea, drag out another set of petals, and you can get those creative thoughts perhaps that you would not reach in a normal brainstorm. And every idea sits in a specific box connected to a specific petal. So your team ends up with a structured artifact. It's not a random list. And when the workshop finishes, you can drop the whole petals into your requirements document, your risk register, or your backlog, and you don't have to sort unrelated sticky notes. Also, why I love it, it's a great leveler for remote teams. Everyone works on the same virtual canvas, and the quiet contributors get just as much space as the loud ones. Every voice ends up on the board. And that visual structure is really good for project managers because you can turn that 2-hour unstructured discussion into a tidy workshop that you can probably do in a standard meeting slot, and you've got document ready output at the end. You don't need fancy software, as you can see, but this is a PowerPoint slide. So a Lotus Blossom template in a virtual whiteboard will work as well. And if your organization only has PowerPoint, it's really, really easy to build a 3x3 grid. And then you're just asking people to type into the boxes, you share the link to the file. So let's think about launching a new project and need to brainstorm how to do the communication planning. So it also works quite well when you start by phrasing your central challenge as a question. So I've written here comms strategy, but you could write a question like, how do we manage our communications on this project? Or instead of writing new product features, you might write, how do we make onboarding effortless in the center box? So once your center is set, you give your team 5 minutes to populate the 8 surrounding petals with related themes. Don't go into tiny details here. You'll run out of steam before the real work begins. So you want broad buckets because these are going to be your next categories. When you've got your 8 petals full, you can move on to the expansion phase. So you're creating a new 3 by 3 grid around every single petal and get the team to drill down into the specifics. So if one petal, let me make this bigger for you. So if one petal is audiences, for example, the outer grid might include the sponsor, the project team, those other things. You get your 8 ideas per petal, and that's where your count is climbing towards 64. So once your team sees that grid explode into 64 ideas, they might start worrying about the clock. So time boxing matters. 5 minutes for the first ring, 5 more for each outer grid, or maybe split them into breakout rooms. Each group can own one petal. So you can run them as a tight 30-minute version, and then you can also refine afterwards. It really helps if you demo the grid first. Don't skip that part. Some people are going to get the idea instantly, or they might have used it before, but others need to see the grid in action before they feel confident about adding their own thoughts. So help them see the connection between how one petal blossoms into a new grid, and then just let them loose. And then you won't get those blank stares and wasted minutes at the beginning. If it feels empty after about 5 minutes, force maybe 2 more ideas. 6th and 7th thoughts usually are surprising, or the interesting deeper things, and that's the point. So when your grids are full, you can step back, you can review as a team. They're already grouped by petal, so you can use dot votes for the strongest concepts, or move petals into your requirements list, or expand where you think there's a particular idea in an outer ring that needs to have its own 3 by 3 box. No messy transcription. Every idea is already connected to the theme that spawned it, and you can trace every requirement back in seconds. So once you've mastered this for requirements, you can see why the same grid works for risk workshops, scoping, and other types of problem solving as well. For risk workshops, drop a risk into the center square, and then the petals become your risk categories or specific responses, and then how you're going to manage them. And you can finish with 8 concrete actions for every risk theme, ready to drop straight into your risk register. If you're scoping, you could put a high-level objective in the middle and then blossom it into deliverables, acceptance criteria. Each petal becomes a work stream, and the outer ring breaks those tasks, breaks them into tasks that you can assign, and then it turns that vague scope into a real plan. If you find that your team is fixated on the first idea and the call is a bit heated, then the grid can force them to generate alternative ideas before they move on, or just move on and come back to it later. So that gives you the opportunity to not commit to a weak solution just because it came from the loudest voice in the room. Now you can use it for objectives, personal objectives, stakeholder needs, anything that benefits from breaking a big idea into parts. And the structure is the star. So once you learn the grid, you can drop almost any project problem into it and watch those ideas multiply. So that's why every project manager should have this template. Right, you now have a repeatable process for turning one big project challenge into up to 64 structured ideas. So pick your next session, set up the template, demo the grid, time box each ring. Now, most people will watch this and do nothing, but you could be the one who runs it and leaves with a page full of ideas.